Chapter 19, Checking off the mandatory requirements for compliance. In this chapter, confirming the contents of your grant application package, scanning for potentially fatal errors and correcting them, assembling the mandatory attachments, submitting your funding request in a timely manner. Before you can call your application a done deal, you need to look at what goes into finalizing your grant application package. Putting on the finishing touches is so important because if you fail to adhere to the funder's packaging, meaning how it wants to receive your grant application, and formatting guidelines, you may lose technical review points. I fill you in on this peer review in Chapter 11. And if you lose sacred review points, your grant application may be eliminated before it starts the race for a competitive monetary award. This chapter tells you the final steps you must take before submitting your grant application for funding consideration. Triple-checking all required components. Practically all government grant applications and even a few foundations and corporations are now using an application package or online upload checklist, a list of everything you need to prepare and submit a complete application package. Use this checklist to make sure you included each section of the grant application the funder expects to find when its program staff opens your submission. Some funders even ask you to include the checklist in the funding application package. Read carefully for instructions on where to place the checklist in the final application package. Not all private sector funders, foundations and corporations, have these easy-to-follow checklists. If you're working on a project for a funder that doesn't provide a handy checklist, I suggest you create your own. Based on what you read in the funder's instructions, type your own list showing the order of the application materials. In other words, what's the first document the funder needs to read when opening your funding package? Continue the list until you have a completed listing for the forms, narrative sections, and attachments. Be sure to hash out the recommended length for each section or for the entire narrative. Creating your own checklist gives you peace of mind and cues you as to when the funding package is complete and ready for submission to the funder. While you may have gone over your checklist at least twice to make sure you have not missed any mandatory components, take the time to review the checklist one more time. Yes, that's a total of 3 eyeball scrolls on your checklists. In the following sections, I outline the information peer reviewers expect to find in your application. Make sure you follow the order that the funder presents in the checklist, which may not be the same as the order I present here. You can also find this checklist at www.dummies.com/go/grantwritingfd7e. Cover materials. The cover materials are the first things grant reviewers see when they pick up your application, so make sure each part listed here is finished, well done, and in its proper place. A cover letter, if required, typed on the grant applicant organization's letterhead and signed by the president of the board or the executive director, see Chapter 5. All the pre-narrative forms in place, with empty information fields filled in with the requested information. Examples of pre-narrative forms include cover page fill-in-the-blank forms and federal grant application cover forms, SF 424A and SF 424B, see Chapter 5. The abstract or executive summary, which typically has page or word limits, appears on a separate page. This section is merely a brief overview of the application's contents and should be placed before the grant proposal narrative, see Chapter 13. An executive summary is the same as an abstract, it just has a different title. The executive summary or abstract is frequently used in government grant applications, and some regional grant-making forums have designed applications that call for an executive summary. Private sector funders usually ask for an executive summary. The table of contents, which is required by most federal and state grant applications, see Chapter 13. Organization history and capability. The section about your organization's history and capability, which is part of your grant application narrative, introduces the funding agency to your organization and what it does. This section is a formal "this is who we are" type of written introduction. Go to Chapter 14 for more about building your organization's credibility as a grant applicant. Double-check what you've written in this section, making sure you address the following points: history of the organization, why it was founded and how long it has been around. Mention the organization's purpose and mission statement as well. Major accomplishments relevant to the proposed grant-funded project, successful capital campaigns, major grant awards, award-winning programs, and successful outcomes for your target populations. Current programs and activities relevant to the proposed grant-funded project. A simple list of what you do in chronological order with the newest programs and activities listed first and the oldest ones listed last. Target population demographics that mirror the types of populations the funder wants to support in its current funding cycle. A brief look at your service population over the past 5 years. Collaborations with local, regional, and statewide non-profit and for-profit partners, the who's who in your stakeholder group. If you refer to any attachments in the introduction, keep a running list of attached documents so you can double-check that they're in place before submitting the application. Statement of need. Make sure your statement of need touches on the following topics: evidence of the problem within the community in critical need of grant funding. How the problem looks from national, regional, and local perspectives. The current national and local research that proves the existence of the problem. The gloom, doom, drama, and trauma that justify the need for grant funds. If you refer the reader to any attachments, list them for double-checking later. Check out Chapter 15 for the scoop on how to convey a hopeless situation for your statement of need. Take another look at the first 2 narrative sections in your funding requests. If you didn't include at least 1 or 2 graphics, go back and look for key pieces of information you can present in a table or chart. Even a simple map of your location helps give the grant reviewers' eyes a visual break for funders with e-grant portals that require online text box entries. You will not be able to use graphics, bullets, bold, underlining, or italics. Every word counts. Program design. The program design is the real meat of your grant application. Consequently, making sure you've hit all the right points in it is crucial. Check that your program design contains the following, and refer to Chapter 16 for more details on this section. 1 concise statement expressing the purpose of the program, what the program will do for your target population. Goals that shadow the funder's specific funding goals, non-measurable or measurable statements that create the vision for what the funding will do for your target population. SMART or outcome objectives written in quantifiable terms, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound commitments to show the steps to achieving your goals. Process objectives, a list of activities, tasks, that will occur when the grant funding is awarded, timelines. Impact objectives expressed in terms of their benefits to end recipients, the step away for 5 years and look-back statements. The logic model graphic, see Chapter 16, which helps the grant reader connect the dots between goals and objectives. The roadmap for lazy readers that is included in the narrative or as an attachment and is a 1-page tells the story document with input, strategy, output, and outcome columns. The time frame for starting and ending all proposed grant-funded activities, the timeline table that connects the process objectives to when they will start and end during the grant funding time frame. Integration of the evaluation plan into the overall program design or plan of operation. Accountability language to demonstrate your process for tracking the SMART or outcome objectives and to show funders that all your performance measurements will be monitored and reported. A dissemination plan, how you'll get the news out about how your grant-funded program succeeded and share your success with other grant seekers and organizational stakeholders. A sustainability plan, how your organization will keep all or a portion of the grant-funded program running when the grant funding cycle has ended. Did you refer the reader to any attachments or appendixes? If so, remember to add them to your running list so you can check them later. Evaluation and dissemination. If the funder requires you to submit a separate evaluation section with your application, make sure yours addresses the following information points: the methods your organization will use to evaluate the progress of your objectives, surveys, pre- and post-documentation, observation, and more. See Chapter 16 for more about the evaluation process, which is a part of the plan of action. How you plan to share, or disseminate, your findings with others. Funders expect their grantees to share the outcomes of grant-funded programs with the public at large. Have a plan and write it down in concise, action-focused sentences. If you refer the reader to any attachments, add them to your attachments checklist for double-checking later. Management plan, assets, and your equity statement. In this portion of your application, make sure you provide details on the following elements of your program: key personnel, including each person's qualifications and the amount of time they will allocate to the project. Experience and education should match position assigned in the grant-funded project. Make sure you include who each person reports to and thereby demonstrate accountability at every level in your management plan. Resources that your organization and its partners bring to the program: technical assistance, financial, facilities, executives on loan, and more. A demonstration of equity, fairness, equal opportunity for all, in hiring staff and recruiting program participants, proving you can find qualified personnel and follow federal and state equal opportunity legislation. If you refer to any attachments, don't forget to add them to the attachment checklists. Head to Chapter 17 for more on how to present your fiscal, human, and physical assets and show fairness. Sustainability plan. Remember, funders do not want to see your organization's entire multi-page plan as an attachment or in the appendixes. You need to be familiar enough with the plan so that you can break down the most important goals for sustainability and include a believable paragraph to convince peer reviewers or program officers that sustainability will happen at the end of their funding award. Acknowledge that a plan exists, that it was created and approved by the board of directors. Summarize the plan in fewer than 5 sentences. That's it. Budget summary and narrative detail. The budget portion of your application is where you must be as accurate as possible. After all, money's a pretty serious thing, especially to the funder handing it over. Be sure to do the following: double-check your budget summary totals and make sure your formatting follows the guidelines. Are you supposed to round to the nearest dollar? Are you supposed to omit decimal points? Write a detailed narrative to support the budget summary's line item amounts. You need to defend every line item. For further information on connecting the information in your budget to the plan of action, refer to Chapter 18. As you've done for the other sections of your application, note references to any attachments so you can ensure the attachments are in place. Avoiding editing red flags. Even after 7 editions of grant writing for dummies and more than $750 million in funded grant and contract awards, I absolutely can't see my own blatant writing errors. Don't be surprised if you experience the same thing. After putting so much time and energy into your application, your eyes and brain may be too strained or fried to spot fatal writing or formatting errors. Unfortunately, the individuals who review and evaluate your grant application, program officers and peer reviewers, are trained, like hawks with trifocals and magnifying glasses, to find your mistakes. And when they do, your application is at high risk of not being funded. That's why recruiting a fresh pair of eyes is so important for making sure your writing, formatting, and adherence to the funder's guidelines are spot on. To get the most from your final edit, you have 3 options: finish your funding proposal early, 5 to 6 days before it's due, and lay it aside for 24 hours before rereading. Taking a break from your text allows you to look at it with fresh eyes and spot mistakes you may not have noticed if you'd kept chugging along non-stop. Have a colleague proof and edit all your work. Be sure to pick someone who doesn't feel intimidated or shy about marking up your mistakes. Give this person a copy of the guidelines you followed. After all, it's very easy to miss our narrative section response. Secure the services of a professional proofreader or editor. Remember to give any outside eyes a copy of the grant application's guidelines. Your hired helper needs to know the purpose of the funding, the funder's instructions for writing and formatting the narrative, and the required supporting documents. You can locate professional editors by searching the internet and typing in professional editor for grant applications. For the last 2 options, you may need to allow a little more than 3 or 4 days, so don't wait until you finish the application to pick a path. Figure out ahead of time what you're going to do so you can line up the resources you choose to work with and then build the needed time into your deadline schedule. Whether you choose to proofread your application yourself or hire someone to do it for you, always run the spell check feature on your word processing program. Doing so takes only a few minutes, but fixing spelling errors early in the proofreading game saves you time later on, when you may be working to fix more prominent errors. If you decide to proofread your own grant application, just toss it in the wastebasket now. No, I'm not kidding. Get some help. Here's a list of the types of bloopers and blunders that grant writers often make and never seem to find until it's too late. Non-measurable goals. When the funder's guidelines require measurable or SMART goals and you fail to incorporate specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound language into your goals, you won't be funded. Non-measurable objectives. Failing to write SMART objectives is one of the most common reasons proposals lose peer review points and end up being eliminated for funding consideration. Narrative section headings and subheadings that aren't the same as the funder's review criteria headings. If the funding agency has specific formatting guidelines for headings and subheadings and you omit these, the peer reviewer won't be able to find the corresponding information for each narrative section. Unpaginated, unnumbered pages in the narrative. If peer reviewers have to match the last sentence on the previous page with the rest of the sentence on the next page because you leave off the page numbers, your application won't be recommended for funding. No sequential pagination from the cover form to the last attached or appended item when the funder has requested total document pagination. Some funding agencies publish specific paginating guidelines that require first page to last page sequential pagination. If you don't follow the instructions, your application won't be funded. Different font types and sizes when the funder instructs you to use only one particular font type and size. Government funding agencies typically publish formatting guidelines that included a font type and size. If you use a different font from the published required font, your application won't be funded. Incorrect spacing between sentences. When the funder indicates a specific spacing, funders will publish the line spacing requirements, single or double spaced, in their grant application guidelines. These are mandatory formatting instructions that must be followed. Orphan lines, headings, or subheadings left hanging alone at the bottom of a page. For visual continuity, bump orphan lines to the next page. Also, always check the bottoms of your pages for standalone lines of texts. Reformat accordingly. Blatant spelling errors or misused words, for example, using there rather than there, our rather than our, and so forth. Use a hard copy dictionary and a thesaurus or your word processing program's spelling and grammar check options to ensure you've used the correct words. Omitted heading or subheading responses that you believe don't apply to your organization. Be sure to type "not applicable" under the heading or subheading or in the information field box. Grammatical, punctuation, and sentence structure errors. When a grant reader, program officer or peer reviewer starts finding these types of mistakes, they want to start reading your application over again from the beginning to look for more mistakes and reasons not to recommend your application for funding consideration. Don't give them this opportunity. Character and spacing errors. When you're copying and pasting word processing text into online e-grant information fields, if you fail to count the words or characters or spaces and characters combined, your application section won't upload into the funder's portal. You'll get multiple error warnings that can cause you to miss the grant application deadline, not just the day it's due, but the time limit for submission. Check out Chapter 11 for more about the importance of formatting your application properly. Different funders have different rules. You can win the grant-seeking game if you read and adhere to each funder's specific formatting rules. Assembling the proper attachments in the right order. The attachments to your grant narrative go in a specific order. For most government grant applications, the attachments are compiled in the same order you refer to them in the narrative. So, read through the narrative from beginning to end and put your attachments in that order. Each attachment should be numbered in the narrative, for example, Attachment 1, Attachment 2, and so on. Make sure you type the attachment number on each attachment. I like to put it in the upper right corner. Only include additional information in attachments if the funder permits them, otherwise, you've wasted your time because the additional material won't be read or considered. Some funders may even disqualify your application for unrequested attachments. The types of attachments you may need to include generally fall into two categories: capability-related documents and financial documents. However, you may also need to provide supporting documentation. I help you figure it all out in the next sections. Capability-related documents. A funding agency may request lengthy information on your organization's structure and administration processes. If you don't have sufficient space in your grant application narrative, you can refer the grant reader to the attachments. Make sure to follow the funder's guidelines for what should be included in the attachments. See Chapter 17 for the personnel information that can be expanded on in the attachments. What are the responsibilities of the board, staff, volunteers, and, if a membership organization, the members? Write a brief paragraph giving the reader a 1 or 2 sentence description of each group's responsibilities. Sometimes for a new, non-profit organization, I insert a copy of the bylaws to fulfill this attachment requirement. How are these groups, the board, the staff, and so on, representative of the communities with which you work? What are the general demographics of the organization? I usually provide a board roster that includes each board member's name, address, occupation, gender, ethnicity, and term on the board. I also attach a list of key staff members and give gender and ethnicity information for each individual. Your board and staff should be reflective of the target population served by your organization. Who will be involved in carrying out the plans outlined in this request? Include a brief paragraph summarizing the qualifications of key individuals involved. For this attachment requirement, I put in one-page resumes for each key staff person. How will the project be organized? Include an organizational chart showing the decision-making structure, see Chapter 17. Make sure the chart is up to date and includes a box for volunteers, if your organization uses any. Titles are more important than names, especially given that the staff may change over the duration of the grant's funding period. Financial documents. The attachments in the finance section should cover or include specifically what the funder is asking for in the grant application guidelines. Here are some typical financial-related attachments: the organization's current annual operating budget, show your current and next fiscal year's operating budget, detail the line item expenses for the grant reader. The current project budget, be realistic here. Develop a budget that clearly shows you've budgeted adequately to achieve the program goals and objectives. A list of other funding sources for this request. Foundations ask for this information, include the name of each funder, the amount requested, the date you sent the grant proposal, and the status of your requests, whether the request has been funded or rejected or is pending. I like to use a 4-column table to present this information in an easy-to-read format. See Figure 19-1 for an example. You can find a template to help you create your potential funding sources table at www.dummies.com/geo/grantwritingfd7e. The financial statement for the most recent complete year, expenses, revenue, and balance sheet. Use the audited version, if available. If your organization has one of those £20 financial reports, pull out the comments and break out budgets for each department and just attach the overall organization expenses and revenue along with the balance sheet. A copy of your IRS 501(c)(3) letter. If you don't have 501(c)(3) status, check with the funder to see whether it's willing to fund through your fiscal sponsor. I talk about fiscal sponsors in Chapter 18. You may need to submit additional information and add information on your fiscal sponsor to the portion of your grant narrative that introduces your organization. Another possibility is that the funder may be willing to exercise expenditure responsibility. Illustration by Ryan Sneed. Figure 19-1, a table neatly lists other funding sources, amounts, dates sent, and request statuses. Refer to Chapter 18 for details on the budget information that goes directly into grant applications. Supporting documentation. Other miscellaneous materials funders may request include letters of commitment, up to 3. Having some handwritten letters of commitment from your constituency is okay. Handwritten letters have a lot of impact on the reader. And don't correct spelling or grammar errors, they make the letters more authentic. Additional relevant materials include your most recent annual report, an original, not a photocopy, recent newsletter sent out by your organization, newspaper clippings about your programs, make sure they're dated, and previous evaluations or reviews, up to 3. Don't go into overkill with too many non-relevant attachments. When in doubt, call and ask the funder. Finally, this section is the one where I put the supporting documentation I've referenced throughout the grant application narrative that doesn't fit in any of the other attachment sections. As always, only include items the funder requests. Meeting submission requirements. You have likely labored for upward of 20 hours or more on your grant application narrative, the forms, and the other mandatory attachments. Don't exhale yet. It's time to get ready to submit your prize funding request package. Read the submission requirements 2 or 3 times and highlight any technical requirements such as special packaging, the date and time the application is due, and the number of copies needed if you're mailing your application to the funding agency. Paying attention to submission protocol. These days, most government agencies prefer to receive grant applications digitally. What does that mean for you? That you must upload all your documents, likely in PDF format, Via a federal e-portal such as GrantsGov, most word processing programs have an option to save a document as a PDF. Look in the File menu and look for a Save As or Download As option. Make sure your Adobe Reader PDF software is compatible with the federal government's version by logging onto the e-portal website and looking for frequently asked questions or submission guidelines. If you're applying to one of the few government agencies that still accepts hard copy submissions, review the Government Grant Application Guidelines for guidance on how to secure and submit your final grant application package, the cover forms, assurances, certifications, budget forms, narrative, and required attachments. Usually, you're instructed not to staple or spiral bind the finished document. Practically all government funding agencies need numerous copies for the peer review process, and it's easier to make copies of a document that hasn't been stapled together or bound. Even if an agency's grant guidelines tell you to send one original and 2 copies, the funder will still make additional copies for the review process for hard copy submissions. Anything other than a simple black metal binder clip looks, and is, wasteful. Unless instructed otherwise, stick with what's unobtrusive and effective. Also, don't create fancy graphics-filled covers, no one asks for them and no one looks at them. Targeting private sector funders? The split is about 80-20, with the majority preferring e-grant submissions via e-grant application portals and others requiring paper copies submitted by regular mail services. Uploading applications on time. If a foundation or corporate funding source sets a deadline, your application must reach the funding source by that time. Similarly, government agencies make no exceptions for late grant applications. If the grant application is due on a specific date, you should be uploading on GrantsGov at least 72 hours before the due date and time. Be on alert for the time zone listed in the grant application guidelines. All the pleading, whining, and cajoling in the world, including calls to the funder from your congressional representatives, won't make a difference if your application is late. Only a natural disaster is a valid excuse. Clicking Submit without panicking. The GrantsGov website is the main gateway for federal e-grants, and one of the most comprehensive e-grants systems. Chapter 5 covers GrantsGov in detail, but I guide you through uploading your completed application to the site right here. GrantsGov has upgraded their e-grant submission portal's name to a workspace. Review the provided application summary that pops up after you click the button to confirm that your application will be submitted to the program you want to apply for. An application can be submitted through the workspace by clicking the Sign and Submit button on the Manage Workspace page, under the Forms tab. This action will submit your application to the federal grant-making agency if completed successfully. The Sign and Submit button can be found in the Workspace Actions box. The button will be visible and activated for workspace participants with the Authorized Organization Representative, AOR, role, authorized individual to submit a grant application on behalf of a grant applicant. Under the following circumstances, the application package is not closed. The workspace does not have an alert message highlighting a submission issue. The forms selected for submission are in the past status. The workspace has an active System Award Management, SAM, registration. The application package is open date as today or in the past. If one of these circumstances is not met, then the Sign and Submit button will be inactive. If there are no locked forms, or you click the Continue button to override locked forms, you will see the Sign and Submit confirmation pop-up window. You are asked the question, is this a changed corrected application, and you have the option to select yes or no. If an application is being resubmitted using the same workspace, the yes option will be selected by default and the grant tracking number from the previous submission will be listed. Answering yes to the question will associate the new submission with the previous grant tracking number. Answering no will not associate the submission with any other application. For more on related submissions, read the Related Submissions Help article at www.grants.gov/help/applicants/check application status/related submissions.htm. To continue to submit the application package, click the Sign and Submit button to complete the process. Otherwise, click the Cancel button. Note, if you receive an error during the submission process or the PDF confirmation page fails to open in your internet browser, see the Resolving Problems and Errors Help article at www.grants.gov/help/html help/manage workspaces/resolving problems and errors.htm. Retain the GrantsGov application tracking number that you receive in the application submission confirmation screen. This tracking number is also emailed to you upon submission. If the agency assigns an agency-specific tracking number, you may receive an email with a second tracking number from the agency that is offering the grant. The Track My Application section, found on the Applicants tab of the home page of the site, lets you log into GrantsGov to determine whether you've registered successfully with GrantsGov, check the status of your grant application submissions, and manage your applicant profile. Visit www.grants.gov/applicants/track-my-application.html.